Matthew chapter 5. We're going to finish the Beatitudes today. This is our final session. It is certainly not our final session in what we're studying. We've got a lot of the Sermon on the Mount left. But this is the introduction. We're going to do we've done 8 weeks, one Beatitude a week. This is our 8th week, and concluding this, looking at the introduction that Jesus makes in this sermon. This is an interesting place he begins this. As we said, I hope you remember our setting. This is the introduction of the king. He is presenting himself and he is offering the kingdom. And they know that. The people have come very specifically for this. They understand the uniqueness of this man. The people are there looking at someone who has done things that have never been seen before. They are coming there to see a man that certainly stands out, and they have the high hopes that this is indeed the Messiah who is going to offer the kingdom to his people. What they don't come is the anticipation, the expectation of what they are going to hear. What they are looking for is for God to say, I'm going to usher in. The Messiah is before you, and he is going to bring the kingdom of David to earth. What they miss in this, if Jesus had done that, if Jesus at this point had said, I'm establishing the kingdom, I'm redeeming the world, I'm going to ascend the throne of David, and I'm going to rule on a redeemed world. The problem would be this: there were almost no redeemed people to inhabit it. If he had delivered what they came to have, almost none of those presents, perhaps none of those present, would have been fit to enter that kingdom. They missed a step in this whole process, and that step is this, that first you must redeem a people and make them fit to inhabit what God is going to prepare. He's going to have to change the character of a people before they can enter into a kingdom that has that character. So here, Jesus is not offering a kingdom that is defined by military might. He's not offering a kingdom that is defined by boundaries and places on earth. He is offering a kingdom that is defined here in the beginning point by character. A transformed character is what he's presenting here. And these Beatitudes really lay out what should mark the people fit for the kingdom of God. This is what you should look like. This is what God will make available in your life to transform you. This is what you must be before you are ready to enter the kingdom of God. And this is something that God is going to have to set, because God is going to have to transform the people, because no one can meet this standard. The other thing he lays out here is they've all been coming ready for happiness, right? And how are they defining happiness? How are the Jews defining, how is God going to deliver happiness to them?
Kill the Gentiles.
Well, go kill the Gentiles. There's a basic thing. Let's just wipe them off the globe, and life gets a whole lot better for those. I have to, you make a joke there, but that's almost true to a point. The Jews, perhaps the most persecuted people in history by one Gentile nation after another, are looking for relief. They're looking for a change in that kind of structure. And instead, Jesus offers something completely different here, something they did not expect. He is defining something for them. He is saying here that happiness is not going to come in the way that you thought. And I know that we have used that word, and I've let you know that most theologians, quite frankly, I'm kind of out here on my own on this one, don't want you to use the word happy here. They don't like it. A lot of your commentaries, a lot of your notes underneath in your books there, your Bibles will probably tell you happy is the wrong word. And they're right to a point, but there is no right word. There does not exist in the English language, there did not exist in the Greek, a word to describe properly what God is offering. So Jesus chooses the common Greek word that was normally translated as happy, and then gives a definition to it that they had never heard before. A definition that makes something else plain as well. That this happiness he brings will stand up in unhappy situations. Because he's telling them this: I'm not bringing the physical kingdom yet, but I'm bringing a kingdom of character that will allow you to live in this world and be happy no matter what the world throws at you. And this is what he's trying to make them understand. He drops principles of life here. And he is also making this plain. He wants them to understand this. As we come to these final two, as I opened this up last time and explained these two, these final two Beatitudes, he's saying this: be prepared for this one reality. as I bring happiness to you that is defined by a character of life, understand that this character is completely at odds with the character of the world in which you are going to live. And because of that, because the world is not prepared for this kind of character, because it is hostile to that kind of character, you'd better be prepared for this reality. That is, you will have persecution as a way of life, because this world cannot handle what you are. It will never be able to handle what you are. Jesus makes this plain. He's coming here with the title of Prince of Peace, but he also said, I came with a sword. It's a dividing line. Understand this. Peace has conditions. God is offering peace, but peace comes with a set of conditions. You cannot negotiate peace unless you set the terms of peace. Any peace treaty has that, right? You write a peace treaty. Here are the terms of peace. You're going to agree to do this. I'm going to agree to do that, and we will have peace. God is offering a peace treaty. Here it is. I will make peace with man under these conditions. And the problem is the world will not accept, as a whole, those conditions. When you lay this out, and you will find this as you go through life, there are those that when you tell them this is what God is offering, this is what God has laid, He is going to deal with the issue of sin in your life. There will be some that will look at that and drop to their knees in thankfulness, but what will some others do?
Make their own terms.
It hardens the heart.
They want to change the terms. What was that?
They'll harden their heart.
Their heart, because what do you have to accept if you're going to accept the conditions and terms of peace that God offers?
You're defeated.
Recognize that you're a sinner.
That you're sinning, that you're not prepared for it. You're not fit for His kingdom. And this is not going to draw a positive response from many people. Exposing sin will send some to their knees, others to anger and even violence. So we're discussing this. We're looking at this description of a person with the highest possible character. And we also have to understand this. God is presenting here, Jesus is presenting here a standard of character that is impossible for you to meet. He knows it when He lays it out there. And there's a reason that He has to make you understand it's impossible. This is not Jesus saying that the second you develop this character in your life, I will save you. I will forgive you. He is saying you can't develop this kind of character. So what's He going to have to do?
Save you in spite of yourself.
Save you in spite of yourself, and then give you the character. He's going to have to make that change in you. He's going to have to create a people ready to do this. This is something we must understand. He is defining the character of people who are going to be in the kingdom. The kingdom starts right now with this offer. And those that will step into this will be developing this character. It will be something that should mark the life of a believer. It should and must mark the life of a believer. If these kinds of things are not developing in the life of a person, you have reason to wonder about salvation, whether it ever really occurred. If someone is not transformed, we do not see God's work in their life. Now, with all that understanding, that all these promises are here, that God is going to provide all of this, He now wants to issue a warning. And this is how we're going to close this out. Let me read this for you. This is the longest beatitude. All the others are about a sentence, you know. Last week, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. This beatitude goes from verse 10 down to verse 12. Because when Jesus brings this one up, He figures, I better explain this one a little bit, because they're not going to get it. Here he goes. Blessed are you when people insult you. I should start up a little further, shouldn't I? Blessed are those who are persecuted, because the righteousness is theirs in the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of things against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. This is the long run of work. It's a longer one to be explained, and I think you're going to see here why He has to do that. So let's ask you this. We know that persecution is coming. That's the promise. Jamie, we did that. Remember we stopped and looked at, I took a week off, and we looked at the reason for trials. And I gave you a very negative week there, talking about why God brings trials into our life. That was James 1:2. 1 Peter 5:10 tells us that God has called us to eternal glory, but only after we have suffered for a little while. Only, you know what that little while is? You know what the word to define that little while is? Life. A lifetime. In God's view, that's a little while. This is when you will suffer. That little while is called life. There will be suffering in this because you're in a sinful world.
What was that reference?
1 Peter something.
1 Peter something, yes, exactly. 1 Peter 5:10.
Thank you.
Called to eternal life, you have suffered for a little while. And the suffering he's going to make plain is all tied to living this character. Living this character. Every one of these draws a response. The poor in spirit don't blend well in a world built on pride. Mourning over sin infuriates a world that embraces sin as a virtue. Meekness doesn't make sense in a world built on pride. Having power under control, these kinds of things, that doesn't even begin to understand mercy, purity, or peace. And now we come to this one. Peace, the offering of peace in and of itself will bring the greatest amount of turmoil for a believer. What kind of persecution can we expect as we look at this? Now, I want you to take a look at this, how Jesus starts this and why he expands this. First, verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted. Now, I want you to stop right there and think about this. How could you read that if you wanted to avoid thinking it had anything to do with you?
The definition of persecution could be small or very large. What kind of persecution are we talking about?
That's part of it. That is certainly there. And we would like to certainly say that we could keep that definition very limited.
Yeah.
But he's going to broaden that a little bit.
Right.
But notice this one. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Those. It's a very clear word there. And what would most people like to do with that one? There's another verse that comes that talks about.
Everybody but me.
Yes. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But I like how he comes back in there and goes, especially you. He makes plain that it's not all of those out there, it is all of us.
Saints.
So he begins here and says, blessed are those who are persecuted. And someone could look at that and go, boy, that is sad, that some Christians, isn't that tragic that some Christians, boy, I'm so glad I live here. And it's just some Christians that do that. But notice, verse 11, blessed are you. Now he comes back and makes something plain here. Those that I'm talking about are you. So he makes it plain that we're talking about a persecution that everyone can expect. Everyone is going to deal with it. 2 Timothy 3:11-13 is one that talks about that. Paul makes this very plain just so that no one can walk away from that and get messed up on this one. I'll start with verse 10. You, however, know all about my teaching, my way of life, my purpose, faith, patience, love, endurance, persecutions. There's a change in tempo real quick. He's talking about all the great things. Sufferings. What kinds of things happened to me in Antioch, Iconium, and Lystra? The persecutions I endured, yet the Lord rescued me from all of them. But here it is. There's all that you go, poor Paul. Isn't that sad that that happened to him? But Paul was chosen. But verse 12, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted. Wouldn't you prefer that Paul left that verse out so we can all just go, boy, that is just so sad for Paul, isn't it? You know, Paul got that raw deal, but I'm glad that God chose some people, not me, to go through that. And Paul goes, guess what? If you want to step into this, this is what you're going to deal with. Blessed are you. I will tell you this, there is a way to avoid persecution in the Christian life. What's that? Don't follow Christ. Just don't let anybody know. Be a stealth Christian. Keep it. And isn't that what the world would like? You hear the talking out there? I don't care what you believe, just keep it to yourself. Now, they would not mind us a bit if we would all come in here, pull the shades, worship quietly, and go home and keep our mouths shut. But if you're going to be identified with that, you're going to have a problem. The term Christian, you remember where it came from?
Christ.
Little Christ. It was a derivative term. It was meant as a put down for people who kept acting like Jesus Christ. Look at them, acting like little Christ out there. And the Christians said, that's sort of the point. We'll take the title. We'll work with that. Accepting identification with Christ guarantees a response. Real faith has a price. Philippians 1:29 says, "For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer with him." 1 Thessalonians 3:3 says, "Be not unsettled by trials, because you are appointed to them." Now there's a rough one. God said, guess what? When I planned your life, I wrote in suffering. I wrote that in. We live in a very different world. We're watching it change, aren't we? I mean, it's hard not to look at what's happening around us and think that Christianity is falling out of favor in the world, right? But we live in a far more tolerant place than most people do. I think we have to still admit that, regardless of what their complaints are. It's far more tolerant than most. Some Christians have grown up, were born into Muslim nations where it is a constant reality of life. But we are seeing a change. We are certainly seeing a change. And in case you haven't been noticing, it isn't just happening this year. It hasn't just been during this presidency. It isn't that America just turned on us all of a sudden. You should be watching, and I hope you have been. I will take you back a few presidents. George Bush, the second George Bush, came into office a number of years ago, and they had a scandal that the Senate was very upset with, a number of Congress people were very upset with, that they found out something was happening in the White House that they found intolerable. Anybody remember the stories that broke on that and some of the discussions that senators and congressmen had? It was discovered that George Bush started his day with a prayer session with members of his staff. Yes, I know, I was shocked too. He started that, and try this one. He also asked, when major decisions and policy issues had to be made, to pause so he could pray for guidance so that God would give him the best understanding of which way to go. And people were appalled that he would do this in the White House.
Didn't the Senate used to open with prayer?
Oh,
They
yes.
used to.
And I believe they still do, but now they bring in, a Native American, and now they bring in a Muslim one, and they do a lot of different things. But yeah, they still do. But people were absolutely appalled by that. His administration was the first time a person for a federal judge position was questioned based on whether or not they were fit for it because they were too Christian, and it might impact their judgment.
Wow.
So this is not new. This is not something that just began here recently. Remember the discussion we had when marriage was going to be redefined. Dobson from Focus on the Family came out and gave an impassioned discussion about this. He testified before the U.S. Senate on the whole issue, testified actually before the Supreme Court on some of the things, saying that marriage needs to be defined as a union between a man and a woman. And he was defined and called openly by several newscasters as a neo-Nazi for that. Be aware that Christianity is in conflict with this world, including this world here, and always has been. This is not new. I can take you back to any time in this America, and we will find some of this always simmering under the surface. It is just becoming more and more in the open than it ever has been before. You cannot contradict the world's standards and expect that the world will not respond to that. It is an impossibility to do that. As a matter of fact, there's a problem in that. And I will put this out to you because I know a number of Christians in my job and other places I've run into that will tell you, I just keep my head down and try not to have anybody notice because I just don't want the heartache. Luke 9:26, if anyone is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him. Yeah, that's a rough one. If you are ashamed to be identified with him, he will put shame on you. I like this one especially. Luke 6:26. Woe to you when all men speak well of you. Now, normally, wouldn't we think that's a good thing to achieve? Everybody speaks well. Everybody has a high opinion of him. And we are supposed to try to do as much as we can to earn respect as the best employee, the best neighbor, the best thing we can possibly be. Whatever our undertaking is, we're to do it as if we're doing it for the Lord. Yes?
But it shouldn't be because of our attitude. I've known some people that are just very abrasive and they're going, well, I'm just persecuting them. And it's like, no, you're a jerk.
Hold on to that, because you're right.
You go, Wendy.
Wendy, yeah, why?
You go.
Wendy.
You are right, and hold it, because you're right. I am going to talk about that. I have some of that in here, because I've run into that too. There's Christians who have shared with me, I had persecution at work, and then we get the story. And it's sometimes very disappointing, isn't it? Sometimes very disappointing. But that is how it works. Some people will hate you not because you have done anything in any way to them. Understand this. When Jesus spoke this sermon, we're going to be told here, we're going to get to that there were people in the crowd already plotting his destruction. He had done nothing to anyone at this point. In fact, his entire ministry was one of doing something for everyone who came in some way, and they were already plotting his death for just saying this. So hold on to that. We'll get to that. Some people are going to hate you not because you've done anything, but just because of you identifying with this. Have we seen history of that? Remember why the church in Jerusalem, the very first church, Paul was always taking up donations for the church in Jerusalem. Why didn't other churches need that? What was going on that was so bad in Jerusalem?
Because they were persecuted early there.
Here's the thing. You could be denied access to any living wage in Jerusalem for being a Christian. Jewish families commonly held a funeral ceremony for a child or a loved one who became a believer. They were dead. They no longer existed. They were shut off from any kind of a means of supporting themselves. And these were incredibly poor people. And Gentiles had to keep supporting the Jewish church because they couldn't find enough work to live. It was difficult. But even that was small compared to what happened later. We know, and if you've read Fox's Book of Martyrs, if you've gone through history, you know this, that things got rough. Nero became one of the worst. The reason that Nero didn't kill nearly as many Christians as other emperors is he died early. But Nero was a rough one. Nero would kill Paul and Peter during his lifetime. Nero had a favorite thing he liked to do. He liked to take Christians, he would cover them in pitch and light them alive as lights for his evening parties.
Yeah.
They found the screams entertaining.
Oh.
One of the things he also liked to do is he liked to keep feral dogs, and he would starve them, and he would take the fresh, bloody skin of an animal and strap it around a Christian, and they would put them into the Colosseum or into these other places, and then turn the dogs loose to see how long it took. This was entertainment. This was entertainment. And if you think that has changed, watch some of the things that have happened under the auspices of ISIS and other things to believers and people in those nations. This is not new. They made justification for it. It was always interesting. Why did they feel they had to do this? Well, because the Christians were a problem. And here were the accusations. I love some of the accusations that came up. You remember some of the things we talked about historically that they blamed Christians for to find a reason to punish them. Nero, of course, blamed them for burning Rome. He had said the Christians said that their God was going to come to fire, and they started the fires. It was their fault. That's what they did. I love this one. They accused Christians of immorality. Yes, it was terrible because they had this thing called the love feast. And therefore, they made up stories of how the Christians had gross sexual immorality. This one is almost laughable when you think about the temple at Ephesus, for instance, that actually kept thousands of temple prostitutes, male and female, because sexual conduct was part of normal worship. And here they go, we're shocked to hear that Christians or conducting themselves in immoral ways. My personal favorite was cannibalism. Yeah, remember that we were cannibals. Why?
Communion.
The communion, the blood and flesh of Christ. The absolute best, I have to say, that's my favorite. The absolute best was this. They hated Christians and felt Christians needed to be put down because they were atheists. Yes. Here was the problem. The Roman culture was very open-minded. For an ancient world it was, and here was the deal. They would let you worship any way you want, as long as you first worshipped the Roman way and Caesar as a god and accepted that. Now, if you're a polytheist and you have all kinds of gods, what's the big deal of adding one more? Real simple. I'll do that. I'll do it. I'll go down. I'll give my sacrifice to Caesar. I'll put in my tithe. I'll do whatever. And then I can go back to worshiping all my other gods. But when you've only got the one, that's a problem for you. You can't add a second because there's only the one. And so Christians were seen as atheists because how could a person be religious with only one God? It just didn't make any sense. This is the craziness and the kind of things they talked about.
Myron?
Yes.
So, I mean, I think of the media today, and like, how did those rumors spread at that time? Like, I don't know, probably not newspapers, things like that. So, I would imagine you have no way to verify source. So, if I'm just a family and I'm hearing about these Christians and those things they're doing, I have no reason to believe otherwise. Because I'm like, how could they believe this? But if you have your method of messaging down well enough, people don't know any different.
People don't know any different. And if there's anything that concerns me, it is the complete lack of a free and independent press we're seeing in our country right now for that very reason. Watch certain storylines and certain things as they unfold or fail to unfold because there are some things they don't want to talk about. And that is a problem. When you control all the methods of information, you can spin any story you want. And that is, I think, perhaps the greatest threat to American democracy. Far more of my concern than voter fraud or other things is a press that is no longer free and independent and giving us more than one side of the story. And in that time, the Christians had no control over that flow of information. And they became the victims of it. And I think we're watching that reoccur now, quite frankly. I think we're seeing that same kind of turn of events. Persecution can come in a number of different ways. You asked that. Well, maybe it's not such a big deal. It's minor stuff. Well, he makes that plain. Persecution, the word here means to pursue, to drive away, or to harass is the original term there. To pursue, to drive away, or to harass. And I love the literal translation of this verse that blessed are those who allow themselves to be persecuted. And we come back to that whole idea. What's the one way to avoid persecution? Don't identify with Jesus Christ. So how do you allow yourself to be persecuted?
Identify yourself.
Identify with Jesus Christ. They don't run from it. And it's a hard one, isn't it? It is a hard one not to want to kind of avoid some of that.
But if you're truly saved, it's a calling you can't deny.
You
You can't, I mean, I know people say life and death and things like that, but an example, we were doing Frisbee golf with another guy from church, and we were playing with a bunch of people that were not like normal people you'd want to hang around, and when they looked at us as the church people, I took it with pride. I'm glad you think I'm a church person, but you could easily kind of, no, I don't go to church, that kind of thing, and shun away from it. But, those are the times you got to shine. Those are the times you got to step up, and I just think that it's easy if you truly love where you are.
And it's really easy not to at times as well.
Oh yeah.
I found it intriguing. I think I've shared this before, that at work at one point a person found out I was a Christian, and then they're, well, at least you're not one of those fundamentalists. And that's an interesting moment, because at that moment they gave me an out. I could be accepted as a Christian as long as I didn't identify too far along the line of my commitment to this book. And if I just kept my mouth shut,
They don't know you very well.
that's right, I could have stayed, in their good graces forever. But I had to say, well, as a matter of fact,
Let me tell you.
as a matter
How
of
do you
fact,
find money?
if I understand what you mean by that word, I probably do fit that mold.
Right.
So yeah, there's a moment in time where you have to make those decisions. And what will you say? How will you respond to that? And will you allow yourself to be identified in that way? Especially when you know someone's looking for a thing to get at you with.
Yeah.
We ran into that with Disney. Some of the Disney people looking at you like you're Christians and you believe, and they looked at us like we were bad people.
Oh, lepers, you're unclean. I know, it's a rough one out there.
So,
John?
yeah.
On the other hand, we do see Paul use legal means to avoid persecution. You know,
Absolutely.
Go seek it. That, I'm a Christian. Go ahead, persecute me. Beat me. Whatever you because if it was possible, he sought to avoid those situations.
If he could, but never by denying his
No,
Lord. Oh,
no.
but if he could appeal to law, he kind of. I really love how he got the one. He goes, "Oh, by the way, now that you beat me and put me in stocks, did you know I'm a Roman citizen?" And yeah, the panic, they couldn't get him as quickly as they could get him out of there, the chain, and then suddenly hundreds of soldiers are guarding him, moving him safely from one place to another. Yeah, he used the law as much as he could. And we do have a constitution that we should use as much as humanly possible with the right attitude to defend that, most certainly. Go back over here,
Oh, yeah.
if you don't mind the lady going first, then go back, yes.
Yeah, I was just saying, someone had once accused me of being a fanatical Christian. I said, oh, I'm worse. I'm radically saved.
Radically saved. I'm not
Deer in the
nearly
headlight
saved.
I thought you were a nice person.
But note that about persecution. To pursue, they are going to be after you. To drive away, as we said, they'd be happy if you just keep your mouth shut and close the door.
Myron,
Yes.
I see that letting people know that you're a Christian is part of your Great Commission. Go out and preach to the world. Because
It's
they
hard
don't
to
know
share
you're
a gospel you don't identify with first, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's got to be a starting point. He has another kind. They will revile or insult you. He comes down. When people insult you, revile and insult you. Literally termed, the Greek there means to cast in your teeth. And here it talks about verbal persecution, which is probably the most common kind we experience here in this country. It's to be cast in the wrong way, to revile, to insult you, to belittle you, to cast you in the worst possible light, to make your character questionable if possible. Those are the kind of things they tend to want to do. Verbal assaults, coarse joking, I should say, name calling. He also says this, you will be spoken of falsely. You will be. He makes that very plain. You will be spoken of falsely, saying all kinds of evil against you. And the implication here is that none of it is true. But it's going to be said. Perhaps the most frustrating thing in life is to find out what someone has said and you have no idea where it started, how they got that idea. You ever tried to chase a rumor about yourself down? How much luck did you have? It is futile. It is useless because once it started, and why is it so easy for it to go going? Because people want to believe that about a Christian. If you can start a rumor, people want to believe that about you. They are determined. They are thrilled to believe that about you. Yes.
But also, if you confront a person that's involved in it, what's the first thing they want to do? They want to deny that they're involved, or they lie about what was said, or they try to pass the buck on to somebody else. So you never really get to the root of the problem.
You never can.
No.
You never can. But in a world determined to bring you down, it will run wild and it will stay there.
Like fire.
The only defense you have is not to feed it with any actions that can be associated with the charge.
Mm-hmm.
A character of life. That's what Peter kept saying. Make sure they have to make it up. Because if they can find just a little bit of a problem, how much can they do with that? If they can find that little chink in your armor, that little place where you actually did do something completely stupid, and they can run with that forever. Not giving them the ammo. The cost comes for two reasons. That you will be persecuted for righteousness' sake, just for doing the right thing. Have you all watched this world belittle someone for doing a good thing? Kids amaze me sometimes. They'll see a young person do something polite and the mockery that will come because the person did a polite and kind act. And I'm just amazed by how cruel we can be when someone does a nice thing. Persecuted for righteousness' sake. People dislike the standards, they dislike the truth, they dislike anyone who makes sin known. As we've said, the second you bring truth into a situation, you have created a divide. Because truth, by necessity, reveals error. You can't do anything else. They also said, and Jesus starts with this, you'll be persecuted for my sake. He's going to say this, the second you identify with me, you're in trouble. Why? They hated me, and if they hated me, they're going to hate anybody. Isn't that our nature? We dislike someone, and then we find out that someone else is a friend of theirs, so we put them in the category too. We always have to divide. And here is the worst divide there is. The world hates Jesus Christ and what he stands for, so they have to hate us. The promise certainly holds. Remember our setting here. Jesus is first talking to one small group, and the crowd is allowed to listen in. Remember that group he's talking to? His disciples. His disciples. And his warning is, if the world hates me, it's going to hate you. Have you ever studied the life of the disciples? Do you know there's only one of them we're sure that lived a long life? John. And he died in exile. The Isle of Patmos. So it wasn't exactly a great life. It was the only one we're sure got a long and healthy life. Paul, we believe, was beheaded at Nero's behest. Peter. And there's more to that story than most people. From what we understand from church tradition, Peter, we know, was married. Paul talks about Cephas bringing his wife along. From what we understand, Peter was first compelled to watch his wife tortured to death, and then he was tortured and crucified upside down. So of the 12 men, we know one was a turncoat, but of the 11 remaining, only one of them we know that lived to a ripe old age. And hardly because things were going well for him. He didn't get a villa at Patmos down by the sea to look out over the Mediterranean. That isn't how that worked out. It was a kind place. Yeah, George?
What was the name of the bishop that bent to stake because she didn't want to worship Caesar?
I should know that with my historical background.
I
I
don't
should know that
remember.
off the top of my head, but you're right. And he stepped into the flames. He did not have to be tied. They were going to burn him at the stake, and he determined, if that's what you're going to do. And he delivered his last sermon and stepped into the flame and allowed himself to die.
What country would that have been?
This was in the Roman Empire again.
Smyrna.
Crazy times. Blessed are you as win people. There's that word again, when they insult you. The implication there is the same word that's used when we looked at James 1:2, whenever, which tells you this, the possibility is always there. There is never a time in your life as a believer when that possibility is not hanging over your head. And whether it be small or great, it could be a number of different things. It wasn't continuous in the time of the apostles. There's nothing here that says it will be every day. Some of us will know long periods of peace in life. Some won't. It is interesting to note that Paul was in continual persecution because when Peter, however, had a rather quiet ministry after his time. He stepped and moved into a smaller community and ministered there for a number of years. And when he writes late in his career, toward the end of life, he's seeing the rise of Nero and the coming persecution, and he has to write a letter to a generation of Christians who had never known persecution and explain it to them. And say, this, don't be surprised by this. It's always been there. I know it hasn't been any, but trust me, I have lived long enough to have seen this. This is the reality they were facing. Persecution can be intense, it can be modest, but it's always going to be there. There's always the animosity of the world. I've always wondered how the health and wealth people ever got that gospel out of this text, how they ever worked that in there, because I just can't find how that works.
Right.
That there's ever been a promise. You know what the promise is, provision? You will get what you need. Now let's be very clear about that. What God believes we need is always a good deal different than what we think we need. And that's the only promise in there. But health and wealth, I will say this, there is a health and wealth gospel in the New Testament, but it has nothing to do with physical health or material wealth. But health and wealth, because remember what the context is? Jesus is saying, I'm offering you a happy life. I'm going to give you a mental health, a spiritual health, an emotional health that the world cannot understand and will react against. I don't know if you've watched this, but that has been the biggest thing that has always driven this home to me, is I watch all the people that are out there clamoring and demanding that if we do this, we'll make a better world, and we're going to give the people all of this, and we're going to bring happiness. And they are the least peaceful people I have ever seen. They're the most continually angry and upset and depressed people I have ever watched. And these are the ones that are outraged at our lack of decency, of our lack of care. You also will note this, we're in the first time in American culture that we have a largely and overwhelmingly secular culture. And the secular culture lives from one crisis to the next. Everything they see is the next threat that is going to end everything as we know it. Why do they respond so strongly? Why is everything throw them to abject fear of the next ending of the world?
Because they have no hope.
Because that's all they've got. This life, this planet, that's it for them. And anything that threatens life, we've watched COVID unfold right now. Is it a threat? Is it real? Yes. We're not pretending it's not. But the absolute fascination with it, the absolute fear of it that we have that is so overwhelming comes down to this. For most people, this life is it. They're absolutely terrified of that prospect. And they hate anyone who's not terrified of it. Taking reasonable steps of protection is one thing, but to be in fear of every breath you take, what a way to live. What a way to live. There's a myriad of blessings we have. Most of them come from that, the health and wealth of peace of life and peace of mind. It isn't that we don't hurt, it's that it doesn't have to overwhelm us now. It doesn't have to dominate every thought of life we have. We also have things the world cannot understand, and one is our fellowship. Why are we meeting and why are we dealing when the state is telling us we don't? Because this is critical. This bonding, this fellowship, this sharing of worship, the time that we pray for one another, that we look into one another's lives and share what's going on is critical to well-being. It's a command of Scripture that we worship together, that we fellowship, because it is necessary to spiritual well-being. Yes.
We could just go back for a second about the wealth of peace, because peace is priceless.
Oh my.
Peace brings a state that I think a lot of people around me don't have, and they're consumed by everything. To your point, it's an obsession almost to not have peace. But when you finally get it, it's like you can breathe and you can see and smell and taste and love and share. I mean, everything that comes with peace. It's
just to lift that burden off your back.
Yeah,
It is
it's priceless.
It is priceless.
And that's the wealth we have as Christians. Is we have
That is our
peace.
health and wealth.
Yes, it is.
That is our well-being in life.
Yes.
That the world cannot understand.
Correct.
And that's what the world is pursuing, all of the things that are not really health and wealth. To achieve the kind of things they think are going to bring that isn't it.
So we should pursue peace.
We have to pursue peace, and we offer peace. And by offering peace, we will also create hostility toward ourselves. It's just a given. That's the reality this verse talks about. And to do that, we're going to be persecuted, it says, for doing what is right. I love this one as he goes into here. Rejoice, be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Here he says, Jesus, you should be thrilled when they persecute you, because they persecuted the prophets before you. This is good news. How can he put those two things together? Why should we be thrilled to be treated as badly as the early prophets were, I should say?
Just because you're living the Christ life.
Why did they persecute the prophets? What did a prophet do? He told what God said. What was the phrase of the prophet? Thus saith the Lord. It's not me. It's not my idea. Let me tell you what God said about this situation. And what happens? People don't want to hear that. So why does Jesus tell you you should be thrilled by this? Because if they're reacting that way, what are you doing? What you're supposed to. You're saying this is what God said. This is what God said. Persecution is going to be there, but I'll go with Wendy's point as we close and come to this one. Be very careful. Please be very careful. People, I can remember several men I've talked to that talked about losing their job for their faith. And it sounded so tragic and so sad until you listened to the description of what caused the loss of their job. And were they sharing the gospel? Yes, they were. Were they doing it when they should have? Sorry, no. When you sign a contract to perform a duty, perform that duty. If you're going to speak for Christ at your work, do so from a position of doing your job to the best of your ability, possibly better than anybody else there can do it, if you possibly do that. Lend yourself some credibility, because what is embarrassing to me is people who are fired and call it persecution, and they're fired for being a jerk. I'll use Wendy's word there. That's just it. Why weren't you doing your job? Why were you taking time off in the middle of the day to follow someone around who didn't want you to talk to them when you were supposed to be doing a job? There will be opportunities. I've listened to some of you who teach and talk about in the public sector and talked about the creative ways in which you've got the opportunity to share the gospel with your classes. There are ways to do things that fall within the rules and bring honor to Christ in so doing. Do it that way. Do it that way. Be persecuted for doing what is right. Don't call persecution when you bring down harm to yourself by doing something stupid. But if you do right, the promise is right here in the text. The promise is right here in the text. You will be persecuted if you identify with Jesus Christ. That's the end of the Beatitudes. This is the opening that issue of how to be happy. From here, we're now going to start talking about the kingdom and its citizenship and the things that mark us from here on out. Let's close for now.